Are you ready? Are you sitting down?
The Schein On Podcast.
The Schein On Podcast.
The Schein On Podcast, Season 5.
All rise.
The best, Jerry. The best.
Let's go.
We're going to pull back the curtain on the divorce process, the mistakes and the missteps. Can you still divorce in a healthy way? The conversation is as good as it gets. It's fun, insightful, tremendous guests. They're going to tell you it's fantastic. Topics that far too often many people shy away from. But not here on the Schein On Podcast. Episode 83 of the Schein On Podcast. I'm Evan Schein. On this week's episode, we're getting into the science of love, relationships, and what really makes them work or fall apart. My guest is the incredible Dr. Galena Rhoades, a leading psychologist. We're going to talk to Dr. Rhoades about what keeps couples together and why some call it quits. Dr. Rhoades sees adults and couples in private practice. She's also a research professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Denver. Get ready for real insights, research-backed truths, and maybe even a few surprises. This is a conversation that you do not want to miss. Producer Dave, how are you?
I'm great. Very excited for the conversation today. Very excited for a lot of odds and ends and tidbits and dockets and over and underrated things that we have coming up.
Want to know what I'm excited for, Dave?
What's that?
February. The month of February. You want me to tell you why?
Yeah, I'd like to know why. I think February is kind of a dark month, but please enlighten me. Yeah.
I'm going to enlighten you, Dave.
Okay.
Pitchers and catchers report.
Oh.
We are closer than ever before to the start of the baseball season. We got the Super Bowl on Sunday. Your Chiefs, look at that. Chiefs, Eagles. I know you're a big Taylor Swift fan. You're a big Patrick Mahomes fan.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you like in the game?
My heart says the Eagles. I spent 4 years in Philly in college, and so they, still don't love them. But man, do I despise the Chiefs. I've had enough of Kermit the Frog at quarterback and Mr. Taylor Swift. It's enough. It's enough. But my head kind of says, I think the Chiefs are going to do it again. How about you?
No, it pains me to say that. My heart's still broken after watching Josh Allen just lose again. And I think Josh Allen is the absolute best in the business, as good of a quarterback as I can remember seeing. And for the city of Buffalo and Josh Allen, I wish the Bills were in their Super Bowl, but you talk about a city and a fan base who has had so much heartbreak. It's tough to watch. But despite pitchers and catchers and despite the Super Bowl, Dave, I know the real reason you're excited for February. We have Valentine's Day on the horizon. Let me ask you, this is the episode before Valentine's Day, February 14th. What's your thought, right? There is so much disappointment associated with Valentine's Day. I have clients reach out to me after Valentine's. I think few people have these expectations of what the holiday should be. How does producer Dave celebrate Valentine's Day? Do you go big, or is it an overrated holiday?
It is overrated, famously created by the Hallmark Company. That might be an urban myth, but it's not a real holiday. But yet, yes, a lot of pressure surrounding it. I don't know. I feel like if you stick to something simple, like how about a nice chocolate cake for your sweetheart? That's it. Just go and get the best chocolate cake. We think about Valentine's Day. We think about chocolates. That's all you're getting, honey. We're going to share a chocolate cake. What do you think of that plan?
There it is. The way to stay out of my office it's simple. Just get the chocolate cake.
Yeah, there you go.
Dave, I know you have an awesome docket ready to go. So as always we do on the podcast, let's fire it up.
Here we go.
And now, let's see what's on the docket.
Couple of great items for the docket today, Evan. First one comes to us from one of your hometown papers, although probably not the paper of record, but it's from the New York Post. That's item one. Item one. The item reads, I'm a divorce attorney. Men are least likely to cheat if they work in these three industries. So I'm not going to reveal what the three industries are, Evan, because I want to hear your thoughts on this piece.
Dave, this makes my head absolutely spin. Look, do I think accountants, pharmacists, and farmers have less physical and emotional affairs? Of course not. Do I think if you're in a relationship with someone who works in these fields, works in these areas, you can put your feet up on the couch and think you can coast through your marriage without a care, without a concern, and feel like solely because you're married to a pharmacist or a farmer till death do us part and your spouse is never going to cheat. Look, I think this completely misses the mark. I think it's all about the catchy headline. And I think, look, to try to pigeonhole the personality of a cheater and fit them into a specific profession, I think is inaccurate. And I think, look, it dangerously generalizes professions. I also think it shows a lack of understanding on the science behind why people cheat. What's your
You know what? Well, I just think the profession that should have made the list is astronaut. If you're in space, there are cameras on you, and there's probably no one up there with you that you can cheat with. So that's marry an astronaut, and your spouse is just sitting there in space. You can check in with them when you like, and absence makes the heart grow fonder. I don't know. Yeah, it's odd. I don't to categorize by any of these generalizations are dangerous because every relationship's different, right? You agree?
I do. Look, I think every relationship's different. I think everybody's motivations are different. And look, this article, to me, it totally missed the mark.
All right, let's move on to item 2. Item 2. The Washington Examiner reports Bill Gates's greatest regret is his divorce. At age 69, Gates has an impressive, if mixed, resume. When you ask him what his greatest regret is, it's not, as this article points out, it's not buddying up with Jeffrey Epstein or microchipping the populace with the COVID-19 vaccine. That's a joke. It's his divorce. Your thoughts on this, Evan?
Well, Dave, look, when you're Bill Gates, you can say absolutely anything and people will listen and hear what you have to say. Interestingly, my first thought was his divorce is pretty recent, and apparently he regrets it so soon after it was finalized. I also thought it was interesting, and it was a bit hard to tell for me if he regrets the process of divorce and the impact of the divorce. For example, the loss of doing things together with Melinda, the foundation or meditation, things like that that are referenced in the article, or is the regret that the marriage didn't work out? But Dave, let me know your thoughts. Give us your take. And also, I'm curious for you, and you've talked openly about your divorce. Was there a point that you felt similar to Bill Gates, whether it was shortly after the divorce papers were signed or several years later?
My thought on Gates is that it's just sort of an interesting thought for us people that are mere mortals, unlike the great Bill Gates, that no matter how successful you are in business, in how famous you are, how much money you have, relationships are still a very personal thing. And it's kind of the great leveler, the great equalizer. He regrets that no amount of money could make up for that severed relationship. And so it is kind of one of these moments, like he kind of is like the rest of us. As far as regret, I don't look at my divorce with regret. There are definitely things that I wish I had handled differently, but maybe I'm glass half full guy. I try to look at my marriage as not a failure at all, but it was a part of my life, mostly a pretty happy part of my life. And then being apart from my ex-wife now, we're still on good terms, and that's this phase of my life. So regret for me I don't have use for regret. We all have regrets, but we're human, right? But to dwell on it is pointless, I think, because if you're getting divorced, you're probably making the right decision or should I say, there's no bad divorce in a matter of speaking, because the marriage wasn't good if there's a divorce. So you make the best of it afterwards. Maybe that's Pollyanna. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's well said. But let me ask you, when Gates says the divorce was his biggest regret, do you get a sense he's talking about the fact that the marriage simply didn't work out, as opposed to the loss that was associated as a result of the impact of the divorce in terms of doing things together with his spouse? Or do you think he's looking back and saying he regrets the fact that the marriage didn't work out?
Well, he seems to suggest that it was the time that he spent going through that divorce was miserable and made his life miserable. And so, to that, I would say, buck up, Mr. Gates. Not everything is so bad. You still accomplished a lot in life, and marriages are supposed to be painful. So I think he's talking about just the emotional strain that he had to deal with, and that was a very sad part in his life. So, but by that definition, I'd say everybody regrets their divorce a little bit. If we're talking about just feeling the emotional strain of what's going on.
And do you ever think back to the marriage and think, you know what, I could have done this differently. I wish I had.
Mhm.
Or do you think at the end of the day, there were certain things that were just inevitable, decisions were made, choices were made, but do you ever think about the marriage and how you might have responded to something or how you might have
Yep.
handled a certain conversation?
Yes, for sure. There are a bunch of little moments like that, and leading up to the divorce and things I do know that I could have handled better. And when I say better, it's just to try to cause less strain and less pain to everybody involved. But to regret the decision, no, not at all. The marriage was, it had to end. It was not a happy marriage. So it was going to end no matter what. But it's as you know it, Evan, it's a delicate thing. There are very few marriages where both spouses look each other in the eye and say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be married. They both say, yeah, you're right. Shake hands, maybe a little hug, walk away with a big smile on their face. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Both parties feel pain, even if both agree that it should end. They're both going to feel pain. If one person wants to, even the person who makes decision to break it off, they're seeing the happiness out ahead in the future. They still feel pain because they feel an amount of guilt and an amount of just sadness, mourning something that was good that is now gone. You look, people are human. Look back at your wedding photos. It's hard not to, feel like, oh man, that's too bad. We were so happy then and now we're not. So that's the way I feel about it.
No, you're spot on.
Okay. We now move on to the next segment, which is sweeping the nation in terms of its popularity, and it's called
Overrated.
Or underrated.
First item for overrated and underrated. We'll deal with a couple of the legal ones first, Evan, and then move on to a couple of fun ones. Postnuptial agreements. I know that you've spoken on this podcast at length about prenups and that you're a big fan of them, but we haven't talked as much about postnuptial agreements, those that are made after the couple is married, if I understand the word correctly and the legal term. Tell us, Evan, overrated or underrated?
Well, Dave, first, you got it exactly right. And look, it's absolutely underrated. If you're in a marriage and you were thinking about a postnup, you should call an attorney. If you're an entrepreneur and you started a business during the marriage, or you might have received an inheritance or an equity interest in your company, you may want to seriously think about getting a postnup. Maybe you thought about a prenup. Maybe the timing just wasn't right. Or maybe financially, at that time in your life, it just didn't make sense. If your situation looks different now, you should absolutely take the steps to protect yourself, and you should strongly consider a postnup. And for those reasons, Dave, getting a postnup is absolutely underrated.
Underrated.
All right. 1 for 1. Next up, item 2 for overrated, underrated, the gray divorce trend. We've talked about that on the pod a lot, of couple in their golden years and getting up there in age and deciding to end their marriage. Your thought on that trend, overrated or underrated?
And this might shock you, but overrated. For years now, we have heard about the rise in gray divorce, the spike in gray divorce, the gray divorcing trend. Enough. We have talked about it on the podcast many times. Why we're seeing it, when we started seeing it after COVID, the interplay between life expectancy. The bottom line, divorce is prevalent for people in their 20s and people in their 60s and 70s. People want different things. People want to experience different things. People might have different interests. I think let's stop making gray divorce a thing and understand it's happening, just like divorce is for people at all different ages.
Overrated. I agree with you. It became a thing with the media, I think, covering the so-called phenomenon, when really, if your marriage should end, it should end, and it probably doesn't matter too much about how old you are. Next topic for overrated, underrated: social media clauses in divorce settlements. I am waiting with bated breath to hear your thoughts on this. It's obviously a relatively new phenomenon, but we know about so many relationships that are complicated by things that are posted online or shared or whatnot. Your thoughts, Evan?
Hey, this is absolutely underrated. Look, if you have even an inkling that this might be relevant, you should strongly consider including it in your divorce settlement agreement. Your attorney should bring it to your attention when you're negotiating the different points in your divorce. So many people like to tell their divorce story, and people want to tell that divorce story for so many reasons. And that might be okay for one spouse, but it very well might not be okay for you. You might be a private person. You would prefer to simply move on and not have your private life shared for the social media world to see. And for those reasons, you should negotiate a social media clause in your divorce agreement, and it's absolutely underrated.
Underrated.
We now move on to a couple of fun ones. Let's take this one first, Evan. Group texts. We're all part of group texts. Sometimes they're a lot of fun. Sometimes they're as annoying as hell. Tell me, overrated or underrated group texts?
Dave, overrated. Not only are they annoying as hell, but I'm going to give you a different take. And look, I get the reason for it. I get it might be efficient. I get it. I really, really get it. Why have a lot of separate conversations when you can just have one? You want the answer?
Yes.
I'm going to give it to you.
Okay.
Because the one time you write something in the wrong group by accident, because you get your groups confused or mixed up, I can promise you that you're going to be anti-group text real fast. It's just not worth it unless it's your fantasy football group text message where you want to ask if someone's looking to trade for a running back, or someone says, here's my address to Venmo me the fantasy football dues. There's absolutely no reason for a group text. It's just not worth that one time you're going to make a mistake. And for that reason, Dave, it's overrated.
Overrated. Even the fantasy football text can be a problem. I had one this year where I was in charge of the league. So I set up the group text with about 14 guys asking who wants in. And then I was too lazy to redo the group text. So these 4 guys who said, no, thank you, I don't want to participate in the league, they stayed on the group text through the whole season. And
here's the problem.
Yeah.
To me, that's something wrong with them, right? At some point, remove yourself from the group. And if you're technologically challenged and you don't know how to remove yourself from the group, how about they just text you and say, Dave, take me off this terrible group chat.
You're right. It's their fault. Finally, America needs to know Evan Schein's thoughts on this. Pineapple on pizza. Yay or nay, overrated or underrated?
Dave, pineapple on pizza gets a yay for me.
Oh,
underrated. Look, there's a lot of pineapple on pizza haters out there. Dave, look, we talk about a lot.
Yep.
We've never actually talked about this. So for all I know, you could be one of those pineapple on pizza haters, but not me. And look, in full disclosure, I don't walk into a pizza shop and say, you know what, I'll take a slice with pineapple. Pineapple is not my first choice for a topping. It's probably not my second or third, but I can appreciate it. I can appreciate what it says about the person who stands in line with a lot of people and says, I'll take a slice with pineapple. I appreciate the adventure. I appreciate the uniqueness. And I'll tell you what, if I'm out with someone and someone orders pineapple on pizza or pineapple and ham or pineapple and bacon, you know what I'm thinking? That person has style. That person is open-minded. That person is a bit rebellious, and I love their confidence. So you know what? For everybody listening, the next time you're on a date and your date orders pineapple on that pizza, as opposed to that boring cheese pizza. You
Mm.
think about what I just said. And for those reasons, Dave,
Under-
pineapple on pizza is underrated.
Underrated.
You know, I think you turned me around on that, Evan. I might have been anti-pineapple. I don't choose it. If it's like the only slice there, I'll eat it. It's not terrible. It's fine. But I think you're right. Why yuck somebody else's yum? You know, I don't understand these people that say, you know, pineapple on pizza is a crime against humanity. There should be a law against it. You can't do it. You know what? Then don't eat it. Don't eat it.
100%. To me, it's about what it says about the person
Yep.
more than the actual taste of the pineapple on the pizza.
Mystery solved, and well done on overrated, underrated.
Our featured guest on the Schein On Podcast is Galena Rhoades. She's a research professor, director of the Family Research Center at the University of Denver. Galena, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. I'm glad to be with you.
And we're excited to have you on. And I want to start by asking you, tell us about your background and what inspired you to focus your career on relationship dynamics and family well-being.
Well, just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a clinical psychologist by training. And as you said, I'm a research professor at the University of Denver, where my work focuses on programs for families, basic science research about couples in particular, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what predicts divorce, and also community-based programs, especially for families from minoritized groups or who live in poverty. And what inspires me to do this work, I think, in relationships and relationship science and in the community, is recognizing that our closest relationships, particularly romantic relationships and family relationships, really are the fabric of every community. And if something is not going well in those core relationships, it impacts every other area of our lives. Education, work, all kinds of things. And so to me, really focusing on those core relationships is key to living the lives we deserve to live.
And one of the things you mentioned, obviously, you look at and research different things that impact divorce or suggest divorce. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about infidelity throughout your career and research?
I think one of the most surprising things about infidelity in particular is that it often happens fast, and it is not especially well predicted by how things are going in your relationship or in your marriage.
Tell me about that, because that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, so what we find is that, if you're less happy in your marriage or in your relationship, sure, you're more likely to cheat in that relationship. But it doesn't explain very much of who cheats and who doesn't. In fact, I think what's more important is probably just the availability of other people and people's sort of openness to connecting, right? And so infidelity itself is relatively difficult to predict, at least to predict from how things are going in your marriage.
Do you think certain love languages are more compatible than others, or is compatibility in relationships a little bit overrated?
Oh, what a great question. I think the love languages, it's a really nice tool to use because it helps us understand differences between us, right? And it helps us think about how to manage those differences and how to best meet one another's needs. But I don't think it's a very good compatibility tool because those things can shift, right? And it's not so much if you're the same or if you're different in this particular way that matters, right? We know that people who are more similar in lots of ways, probably in love languages too, tend to be more likely to get together. But it's not what's at its core. What's at its core is how well you manage differences together, how well you communicate and manage potential conflict.
Galena, what's one piece of advice about relationships that has aged poorly in today's world?
Um, uh, that's funny. I think a lot of advice about relationships, whether it's, based on like religion and, I think oftentimes it gets misconstrued as being related to like values, right? And actually I think a lot of that relationship advice is pretty good, right? Like in thinking about um, one of the things that I do a lot of research on is for whom and why living together is associated with a higher risk of divorce. Okay, I'm a pretty liberal person. I don't come from a religious background. And so when I say that I look at research on living together being associated with divorce, I sound pretty conservative, right? Because that's often something that
Sure.
religion or more religious people say is wrong to do. But in fact, we do find that living together before you've made a commitment to your partner to get married is associated with divorce in so many studies and so many different samples.
Tell us more about that
And
relationship and what you found in that connection.
yeah, so we find in particular that if you live together before you're engaged, right? If you live together before you've made a public mutual commitment to getting married, there is a higher risk for divorce. And people who live together before they were engaged have lower marital quality. They report less satisfying marriages later on. And so it's a common piece of advice, right? Actually, in both ways
Sure.
today, right? Either try it out, you better test it out before you get married, or don't live together before you get married because, it's wrong to do based on religious values. But here's what I think happens in that. For some people who move in together, particularly if you're moving in together to test the relationship because you have some doubts about its future, there's going to be a group of people who move in together and wind up getting married when they wouldn't have gotten married had they not lived together, right? So we think about this, we call this sliding versus deciding, right? So if you move in together, it automatically makes it harder to break up, right?
Of
Because
course. Sure.
you've signed a lease, you're pooling resources, you're buying furniture, you're getting
Yeah.
a pet
There's other
together,
considerations. Sure.
all of those things, and we like to call those constraints, things that might keep you together regardless of how the relationship is going. So there's some subset of people who move in together and then slide into getting married, and that likely puts them at risk later on for lower marital quality and divorce, right? So what I think about in terms of kind of turning that advice on its head or giving the why behind it is, if you're trying to sort out if this person is your future and marriage is your future with your partner, really do the work to think about the relationship, right? But don't put all these constraints on it where you get entangled in something that's harder to get out of later on if you decide, in fact, this isn't what's right for you, right? So I guess that's one piece of advice that I think seems outdated, but in fact, there's a kernel of it that actually makes a lot of sense. It's just maybe not where the advice started in terms of why people had,
No, I
believed
think it
that it
makes,
was
I think, yeah, I think it
wrong
makes all the
to live
sense in,
together.
in the world. And even listening to your explanation and sort of the research and, behind it, hearing you talk about it, right? I think it drives the point home. I want to ask you to put on your research hat. If you can design a psychological study with absolutely zero budget or financial constraints, what topic would you tackle?
I think I would be in this area, I would be most interested in really understanding how the context of relationships affects families, right? So we think about, families who have lower income levels, who have fewer resources, are more at risk for problems in their relationships. They're more at risk for divorce or breakup. They're less likely to get married. what could happen if we could give everybody the same context in that way, right? And what would we see if we sort of leveled the playing field in terms of the accessibility of healthy relationships? And what would we see in terms of outcomes for children too, right? If we were able to really give everyone the same context and then tools to have healthy relationships, I just think we would, I think, but it would take a study to know, see so many things shift, not only for families, for children, for the larger family, for the community. In so many ways, I think we would see benefits of being able to truly support families in that way.
Well, I think that'd be fascinating. I want to ask you about relationships and the challenges that couples face. Do you believe a relationship can fully recover when there has been some type of betrayal, infidelity, or some other type of betrayal?
I do believe that a relationship can fully recover. In fact, I think relationships can be stronger. I do not mean that I would prescribe infidelity or a betrayal as a way to make your relationship stronger
Just to be clear
at
for anyone
all.
listening,
But
correct.
yeah, just to be clear, don't do that on purpose. But what I see in my clinical practice is that if couples put in the work to really understand what happened, what were the factors that led to infidelity in particular, I think is, a betrayal that we often think of. What were the factors that led to that, right? Both individually and in the relationship. And then we're not going to go back to what the relationship looked like before that betrayal, right? But what do we want it to be like going forward? How do we build a new relationship that maybe can help support us in preventing that kind of betrayal happening in the future, but more importantly, really meets the couple's needs at this time, right? Which might be different than they were a decade ago when they got together, or, before children or before infidelity. And so I think if a couple can really put in that work, I would say it's a minority of cases, but it is possible that in fact they come out much stronger and happier than they were before going through, infidelity or another kind of betrayal in the relationship.
Hey, Galena, when you talk about the work, right, in that scenario, infidelity that couples, really need to put in to have a stronger, healthier relationship, is part of that work healing, right? And what does that healing process look like specifically in the case where there is infidelity?
Yeah, so I think here's a model that it's actually colleagues of mine, Christy Gordon and Doug Snyder and Don Bachem developed. And the model basically approaches infidelity by thinking about it in a way as if someone has gone through some kind of situation that might cause PTSD, right? And oftentimes the partner, the non-participating partner is sort of the term we tend to use that isn't judgmental, right? But the partner who was sort of most hurt in infidelity often has those kinds of responses that seem like PTSD, right? They've got some intrusive thoughts about what their partner did or what happened with the partner's affair partner, right? They might avoid certain places like a, hotel where they knew something happened. They've got a lot of sort of extra thoughts and stimuli that they're trying to sort out. They also may need to do some kind of checking behavior that on its own would be unhealthy, right? But there may be in this first phase of dealing with infidelity, it may be important that a couple establishes some ways to build trust in small ways, right? So, we might establish, she's going to check your phone every evening, right? And it's not going to feel comfortable to either person, but it's a way to build trust because every time she sees that there are no new text messages, right? No new phone calls. It's going to feel better. She's going to make sure that you're at work, right? During the day. There may be some checking behavior that's not long term, but we can use that as a way to build some trust, right? And reassurance. So there's a phase at which some things have to shift in the relationship in a way that won't last, right? Like that checking behavior or that reassurance, that can't go on. That's not healthy for the future. So that's one phase. Another phase of that work is then really talking through what happened, what led to the infidelity, right? And so, and that's hard work because both people need to think about what their own individual factors and the relationship factors that may have contributed to it being a possibility that there would be infidelity in this relationship, right? And that can be hard to hear. It can be hard to look at, it can be hard to hear, but a lot of couples are able to do that really well, especially with support in therapy. And then the next phase, and some couples may decide at this point, or maybe it's one partner deciding it just doesn't work for me, right? And I need to leave this relationship, but at least they've done some processing and maybe are leaving less angry at that point. But the next phase I think is really important, which is now let's look forward to what we can be going forward together, right? What are some of the things we learned that we maybe need to think about shifting so that this might not happen in the future? But more importantly, what do we need to take with us? What things were working well? What do we need to change so that we have the relationship and the connection that we both want to have going forward? So there's a lot to learn from that experience. And then it's about setting expectations and navigating what a new relationship looks like on the other side.
And how often do you find that couples are able to work through those different phases and really get past the infidelity or whatever transpired during the marriage,
right,
to put them in your office? How often do you find that it works, or do you find a particular phase where if the couple is going to realize it's not going to work, it's going to break down at this juncture?
That's a good question. This is not based on research, but my and I don't think there is any research on that actually. I mean, there's some research probably on how many couples have an affair and then go on to stay married, but we don't have a good sense of the quality of that marriage. We often don't know if the partner knew about infidelity or the extent of it in those big studies. I think in my own clinical practice, I bet we see about a little more than half of the couples who wind up in therapy deciding to go on together, if they're able to do that work in those phases to really think through what happened and where they want to go. But I think more than half are able to do that if they can put in that work and continue doing it.
It's all about the work. In your opinion,
All about the
Galena,
work.
what are the biggest myths about love, about relationship, about marriage that are perpetuated by pop culture and social media?
I think one of the biggest myths is that you've got to find the one, that there is one person out there for us and they will magically appear. I think oftentimes, I think we hear that story because for people who are happily married, that's how they revise history, is to look back and say, I knew he was the one the day I met him. But if we went back in history and talked to you on that very day, I doubt, there's some subset of people for whom it's true, but for most of them, they wouldn't have said like, I met the man, we're done, I'm getting married to this man, we're going to live happily ever after, right? So I think that's one myth that's really important to recognize, because it implies that we just have to like wait around for someone to drop out of the sky and they're going to be a perfect match for us, right? They're going to complement everything that we bring to the relationship. And all relationships take work. They take work before we even meet someone, right? We've got to understand ourselves. We've got to understand our strengths and our pitfalls. we have to think about what might be a good match, but again, I don't know that it's so much, what the match is as much as how well you can manage differences and communicate well together. I would say another myth that is, I think, a kind of new is our understanding of dating apps today. I think people get super burned out on dating apps, and I'm not sure. I don't know that it's the best way to meet people, but it's what we've got today, right? And I do think there's a lot of utility in being able to connect with people that you wouldn't run into,
Sure.
in your apartment building, at work, in college, in different settings. But I think the myth in that is that, we're somehow going to know from somebody's profile, from profile pictures, from the pretty benign, ridiculous things that people text about, message about on dating apps. I think we have to think about them not as dating apps. They're not about dating in the dating process. It's about meeting, right? It's a way to meet people and then do the work to sort out if this person might be a good fit, if the relationship could work between the two of you.
And Galena, a moment ago, you mentioned really the work that people do on themselves prior to even meeting someone. Tell us about how someone's family background and early life experiences shape a person's approach to relationships later in life and in adulthood.
So one of the things that we know is that, going through really difficult family experiences can make it harder to have the relationships that you want to have later in life, especially for people who experience child abuse, sexual trauma, different really, really hard experiences. It can make it harder to trust people, or it might make it too easy to trust people in romantic relationships. And so, but broader than that, I think for all of us, our family relationships, right, are where we begin, right? And so the ways we learn to communicate with one another, or not communicate with one another, how much affection there is in the family, all of those experiences tend to shape us. And what we see is for some people, for most people, they're going to continue those patterns, right? For some people, they're going to do just the opposite. But neither of those is a very intentional, thoughtful approach, right? And so I think one of the best things we can do is think about our own family background experiences and really think about what we want to take with us, what worked well, what we see as positive traits and values that we want to keep experiencing and take with us into our own romantic relationships and families. But what are things that really didn't work well, and how can we change them? Not to just push them away and avoid, like, I don't know, my parents always fought behind closed doors, so I'm not going to be shy about fighting in front of my kids, right? That's not quite the approach, right? Like, what you want to do with that is take it a step further and really think about what's right for me and what's right for my family.
You've worked with so many couples in your practice, right? What would you say the key differences are between the couples that thrive
Mm-hmm.
when they're together and the couples that really struggle to stay together?
So I tend to think about maybe three key components, and part of this comes from um, my work, and we have a new book out called Fighting for Your Marriage, and I think there are several keys to success. One is commitment, right? Being able to make a commitment and not threaten the relationship when things get tough, right? Whether that's threatening it in your own mind or especially saying it to your partner, right? Like, if you want to totally derail a disagreement or discussion, say something like, I don't know if this is going to work out between the two of us. It will 100% mean the conversation goes in a different direction every time, right? So that commitment part is really important to being able to really prioritize the relationship in your partner and one another in that. Another key is communication. You know, we don't learn good communication skills growing up. We could talk about lawyers for a minute. I've worked with a lot of lawyers.
I can take it. Whatever you're going to say, I can take it. Take
I've worked
absolutely
with
no offense.
a lot of lawyers in my practice, you know, especially trial lawyers. Like the way lawyers learn to communicate and argue is very effective for being a lawyer. It's not very effective at being in a relationship, right? And so I don't mean that lawyers are bad at relationships, but it takes shifting gears
Sure.
to be able to communicate well in a relationship. And it's not something that we naturally learn. And then lawyers go on to actually learn like lawyering communication skills, which I think can sometimes interfere. But that's kind of an aside. But communication is really important, right? Being able to stay in a conversation, keep our own negative emotion from getting too hot, right? Being able to use good skills where we're hearing one another and collaborating and coming up with the best solutions to a problem. The other part is the reason we get into relationships in the first place, right? Is love and connection and friendship. And couples do best when they can keep that part of their relationship going, even in the face of stressors or conflict or challenges, right? But they can, in the day-to-day, they have fun together, they do fun activities, they make one another laugh, they show one another affection and love, they plan fun things together. And that takes work too, right? Especially as our lives get busier and kids might come into the picture, you know, it's not as easy to keep that connection or intimacy alive. It does take more work to do that. But it's why we got into relationships in the first place, and such an important thread to being able to stay happy and stay together over time.
I know my wife is probably laughing, listening to this, because she always says, Evan, when you're talking to me, let's take off the legal hat. So she will definitely get a good chuckle out of that.
That's good. Well, let's have her join us next time.
Yeah. You know what? If she's open to it, I'm open to it. I am an open book, not a problem. Happy to have her join. And you mentioned your book, Fighting for Your Marriage. Tell us about the book. Tell us what motivated you, what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, so Fighting for Your Marriage, it's actually the 4th edition of this book. So I teamed up with my 2 longtime colleagues who were actually also my graduate school mentors many years ago, to do the 4th edition with them. And what's really neat about it is that it is really based on research and what we know about what works for couples and what the pitfalls are. And it gives very practical guidance and skills and tools that people can use to communicate better, to keep that love and intimacy alive and going, and to deal with particular stressors like infidelity or, other things that might cause stress or hurt in a relationship. So it's a very practical guide to being able to have the relationships we all want to have, and I think really easily accessible to all audiences.
That's fantastic. And what did you learn, or what have you learned about yourself, whether it's from the work that you do in practice, the research, or writing the book, that has either surprised you or changed the way you think about relationships and love?
I do a lot of training facilitators to run interventions for couples and or individuals about relationships. So, I might spend 3 days working with 50 people who are eager to learn how to run groups or classes for couples and people around relationships. And every single time I teach one of those facilitator trainings, I walk away, even though I'm the one saying these things,
Sure.
with things I know I can be doing better in my own relationships, right? And I think it continues to surprise me, right? I mean, sometimes I know in the moment when I'm about to say something, I'm really doing this wrong. I shouldn't say what I'm about to say, and I say it anyway, right?
As all of us do.
That's right. That's right. The training only goes so far. But on a bigger level, I think it continues to surprise me how much we need to really focus on our relationships and be intentional. And that it's, our default may be to avoid or withdraw or not communicate or expect the worst, whatever that is, right? We got to get over it. And you got to lean in and do better in our relationships. And there's always room for improvement.
If you can sit down with one historical figure or famous couple and analyze their relationship and put your book to work, who would it be? And what would you want that couple to learn?
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, well, my personal answer to this question, the first half of your question is always Jane Goodall, because I have so admired her role in science. And so, but I don't know that I would want to sit down with her and work with her around her marriage or relationship. So let me pivot on that. This is going to sound crazy, but one of the things that I think is so interesting is as you think about like the way our country was founded, right? We think about our founding fathers or, people who came over on the Mayflower and the, 10% of our population in the US that is related to people on the Mayflower. We know nothing about what was happening in those relationships and those marriages, right? And so, you take, I don't know, George and Martha Washington, right? Or Thomas Jefferson, any of those really core people in the history of the United States. I think it would be incredibly interesting to understand how their marriage dynamics may have really influenced everything, every decision that they made, that we see as them making on their own, right? As the founding fathers of our country. But in fact, that's not true, right? That they were part of families and systems. And so maybe it's Martha and George Washington.
That's fascinating. Like I'm listening to your answer and I'm like, you know what? I would love to know, right? It's a fascinating area and topic. Just like you mentioned, it would really be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah.
And going from George and Martha Washington to another guy who I would love to know about his relationships, producer Dave, I'm going to bring it back on to the podcast for a fun segment we do on the podcast called They Said It.
My life's an open book, Evan, but we have business to attend to, and it's the segment known as They Said It.
They said it.
They said it.
They said it.
Yes, on They Said It, I provide 3 quotes from historical figures, celebrities, or other. We're going to have a lot of old, dusty philosophers quoted today in this edition of They Said It, and we're just going to have Galena comment on pro, con, or otherwise. Our first quote comes to us from PhD and psychologist Rollo May, who said the following: commitment is healthiest when it is not without doubt, but in spite of doubt. I'm going to read that again because I had to read it a couple times the first time I saw it because it's you got to decipher that. Commitment is healthiest when it is not without doubt, but in spite of doubt. Galena, any thoughts on that?
I haven't heard that quote before, and I'm totally pro. What I think is true about that is, my colleague Scott Stanley often says, commitment is making the choice to give up other choices, right? Commitment is an active decision with follow through, right? And it does mean that you recognize what you're giving up, the sacrifices that you might be making. And so I really think that comes through in this quote in the same way that, we don't want blind commitment or blind faith in relationships. What we want is a recognition that we're choosing this person, this relationship, these priorities.
Great answer. I have nothing to add because that was perfect. Next quote comes to us from philosopher Carl Jung, who said the following: "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Ooh, deep. Well, he was Carl Jung after all. Your thoughts on that one, Galena?
Well, one of the things, that we just talked about some was compatibility and whether we know if we're compatible or not. But I think more than that, what I do like about this quote is that it shows us how in a relationship, two people can really be better together than they are on their own, right? And I think the best relationships, whether that's romantic relationships or friendships, really make us want to be better people and grow. And it's wonderful when that can happen together. So that's where I'm taking this, that it's really about making ourselves better and wanting to be better for someone else.
That's an interesting way of putting it. And I might be stating the obvious, but that's what a relationship is what interacts between the two people. It's not the sum of the two people. It's what might come out of it. I'm kind of inspired by that one. I think I'm going to go form a relationship. I'm just going to walk the halls of my apartment and see if I can meet some. Oh, no, I'll do that later. Our final quote comes to us from Uncle Sigmund. Yes, the one and only Sigmund Freud, who said the following: "We are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love." Ooh, sounds like that could have come out of a Hallmark movie, but nevertheless, it came from Sigmund Freud. Your thoughts on that one?
I think when we love, we risk losing, right? And there may be some people who decide that it's not worth it to love because the risk of suffering or loss is too big. But, to me, that is the life experience, right? And whether you lose someone because a relationship ends or there's betrayal or because someone passes away, I think focusing on the fact that it's worth the suffering to get to experience that love and connection.
Yeah, I think most of us have been there at one time or another, and most of us have been to the point where we've said, why do I even bother? This hurts. But, the answer is it's supposed to hurt. It's not unlike losing a loved one, somebody that that is elderly and passes away, and it hurts. If it hurts, I always say it's supposed to hurt. You cared about them. That was a relationship that had value to you. And so there's going to be some suffering. As the song goes, love hurts. Anyway, you've done a tremendous job and you've been a really good sport, Galena. Thank you so much. And back to you, Evan, to wrap things up.
Dave, thank you. And Galena, that was fantastic. Loved having you on the podcast. Psychologist, research professor, author of the book, Fighting for Your Marriage. I got to ask you, how do you find the time to do it all?
I don't, but I only do things that I really care about. So I always make it happen, and I don't sleep a lot.
Love that. Tell everybody where they can get a copy of the book, where they can learn more about you and the research studies and everything wonderful that you have going on.
Great. Fightingforyourmarriage.com will give you just a quick overview of the book, easily able to find it on Amazon. And for me, I'm easy to Google Galena Rhoades. You can also find out about the nonprofit that I run in Denver called Thriving Families, where we offer a program called Motherwise at motherwisecolorado.org.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me.
Episode 83 of the podcast. Dave, this was absolutely tremendous. What a guest. How great was Galena Rhoades?
Fantastic. Learned a lot, and a lot of info and tips and life advice packed into a short podcast.
And she was great, as was the Docket and the fantastic overrated, underrated segment that you spent hours putting together for us and the Schein On Podcast. And everybody can listen to the podcast wherever they listen to their podcast and at Pod 617. Evan Schein, and I'll talk to you again real soon.